This artifact has been lying in the ground for 385 million years, and only now have people started to study it. While a human footprint on the muddy shore of Africa has been preserved for almost 1.5 million years, it's as if someone walked there just yesterday. And no, this is not just my wild imagination about millions of years, but a scientifically proven fact. Hello, my friend. You're watching Kirtop. My name is Alexander. Here, I dig into ancient discoveries and strange stories from the past, and together we try to understand how everything really happened. I found a creature that poops gold, and I'll tell you about discoveries that aren't connected to each other at all, but each one seems impossible in its own way. A tomb with servants filled with gold. The man was literally buried in gold. Pectorals, bracelets, earrings depicting crocodiles and bats from head to toe. But he did not go to the afterlife alone. Next to him, they found the remains of other people, apparently his servants, who were sacrificed so they could accompany their master to the other world. This is Panama. The El Caño Archaeological Park, an elite burial site more than 2,000 years old. The site has been known since 2009, but it was only fully excavated this year. For the local cultures, death was not the end. It was a transition where status simply had to be preserved. And there, displaying wealth in the grave is not just a whim, but something like a political statement for centuries to come. The project leader, Yulia Mayu, notes that the finds from El Caño are strikingly similar to items from the neighboring Sitio Conte site. So it turns out, 1,000 years ago, there was an entire network of trade and political connections between different communities here. And judging by the craftsmanship of the metalwork, the local blacksmiths were not inferior to the best craftsmen of that time in the world. A hammer that's 500,000 years old. Let's start with a discovery that proves fine handcrafting is not an invention of recent years. In Boxgrove, in southern England, archaeologists from University College London and the Natural History Museum determined the age of a small ivory artifact. It turned out to be the oldest such tool in all of Europe. It's about 500,000 years old. The object itself is only 11 centimeters long, triangular in shape. It's a retoucher, a soft percussion tool that ancient people used to sharpen and refine stone tools. It sounds simple, but this very technology became one of the key steps in the development of human tools. In Africa, a similar bone tool is more than 1.5 million years old, but in Europe, finds older than 43,000 years are very rare. The artifact from Boxgrove immediately pushed this boundary back by more than 400,000 years. What interests me is not so much the age itself, but why they used bone instead of stone. The thing is that a bone retoucher allows you to finely sharpen the edge of flint without damaging the tool itself. In other words, people already understood back then which material was better suited for which task. And elephants and mammoths in ancient Britain were a rare resource, so working with a tough layer of ivory required special care and skill, a level of skill anthropologists didn't expect from Europeans that ancient. Microscopic analysis and 3D scanning revealed characteristic cracks from impacts on the surface, as well as tiny flint fragments stuck in them. This means the tool was used more than once, but regularly, possibly even for years. And it was made either by early Neanderthals or by Heidelberg humans, the direct predecessors of Neanderthals, and, presumably, partly our own ancestors as well. The author of the study is Dr. Selv Bellu from the Natural History Museum of Syria. That the processing of ivory fragments and its repeated use for sharpening other tools indicate a high level of abstract thinking. Simply put, ancient people didn't just grab whatever was at hand, but understood that bone works better than stone for a specific task, and deliberately chose the material. It's funny that the bone fragment itself was excavated back in the early 1990s, but at that time, no one understood what it actually was. Only now, 30 years later, after a re-examination, not only do we understand what it represents, but we also pass this knowledge on to our descendants. It turns out that the theory of evolution can also unexpectedly change, and I talked in more detail about the theories of human origin in my previous video. But now we're not talking about a discovery in the ground, but about an idea that science officially considered disproven and is now reconsidering. In 1809, the French naturalist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck suggested that organisms change under environmental pressure and then pass these useful changes on to their offspring. Half a century later, Charles Darwin proposed a different explanation. individuals initially differ from each other, and selection simply reinforces the useful differences. The reputation of Lamarck was seriously undermined by the experiments of the German biologist August Weismann. He cut off the tails of rats for several generations in a row, but the offspring stubbornly continued to be born with tails. After that, biologists dismissed the idea of inheritance of acquired traits as a naive misconception for a long time. But modern molecular biology has shown that the situation is more complicated. Organisms really do not pass on just any changes in the body to their offspring. The cut-off tail rat example is valid in this case, but sometimes they inherit molecular mechanisms that help them cope with stress, infections, or hunger. The most studied example is the microscopic worm Caenorhabditis elegans. After a viral infection, starvation, or temperature stress, adult worms change how their genes work, and in some cases, their offspring are born already prepared for a similar threat. Moreover, the effect lasts for several generations in a row. The information is carried by small RNA molecules, which regulate gene activity during stress, and special proteins then deliver some of these molecules directly into the egg cells. Essentially, this is somewhat reminiscent of a situation in which a person, after vaccination, would acquire immunity and pass on the protection not only to their children, but also to their grandchildren. For a long time, it was believed that such markers are erased during reproduction. But some of them, as it turns out, are able to survive this renewal. It seems that these mechanisms have been found not only in worms, but also in bacteria, plants, and animals. In rice, exposure to cold triggers chemical changes in the genes, which increase resistance to low temperatures, and this could have helped the crop spread much farther north of the tropics, where it originated. And orcas pass on hunting skills through learning. Some populations eat mostly fish, others hunt marine mammals, and these cultural differences are preserved for generations. A complete return to Lamarck's ideas is not required in biology. Natural selection still explains most evolutionary changes, and both mechanisms, apparently, can work together. I like the very idea that even the version of evolution taught in school, which everyone sees as long settled, is actually still being refined with interesting new details. I found something more valuable than what I was looking for. Very often, the most valuable discoveries are made not by professional archaeologists, but by people who didn't even plan to find anything. On the beach in Ashdod, Israel, the deputy head of the municipal beach management, Avi Cheprak, was inspecting the shore to help vacationers look for lost jewelry and other valuables. And in the middle of this routine, he stumbled upon an ancient coin, about 2,500 years old. Cheprak handed the find over to the Israel Antiquities Authority. There, it turned out to be the first coin of its kind ever found in Israel. Experts identified it as a coin from the Persian period, minted in the middle of the 5th century BC, with a denomination of siglos, originating from the ancient city of Salamis in Cyprus. Examinations show that the coin is not made of pure silver, but from a metal with a silver coating. This is typical specifically for Cypriot coins of that time. On one side, there is an image of a lying ram. On the other, the head of a ram next to a laurel branch, and symbols that are probably written in Cypriot syllabic script. The special value of the find is that the coin has been preserved intact. Usually, such coins were cut into pieces during trade operations of that time, but for some reason, this one was not. According to the researchers, the very location and circumstances of the find can help us better understand the maritime trade routes between Cyprus and the territory of modern Israel 2,500 years ago. And Avi Cheprak was awarded a certificate of honor for the discovery. It was obvious that the coin is part of public and historical heritage, so he immediately handed it over to the specialist instead of keeping it for himself. An image of King Narmer. The next find is from Iraq, from a city that has recently been associated more with war than with archaeology. A joint group of Iraqi and American archaeologists discovered at the ancient Sun Gate in Nineveh in Mosul a monumental Assyrian stele from the 7th century BC. It was found during restoration work. Nineveh suffered greatly during the occupation of Mosul by the Islamic State group from 2014 to 2017. At that time, the ancient city walls, the museum, and many archaeological sites were destroyed or damaged. Today, the city is being restored, and it was during this work, which is being carried out together with the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures at the University of Chicago, that archaeologists came across the stele. The stone itself is carved from a single block of local marble, about 2 meters high and about 1.5 meters wide. Almost the entire front side is occupied by a large relief depicting King Ashurbanipal, the very one who ruled the Neo-Assyrian Empire from 668 to 627 BC, wearing his characteristic bronze helmet. On the reverse side, there are two more smaller reliefs, presumably also depicting Assyrian kings. Next to the figures, there is an extensive cuneiform inscription, which has not yet been fully deciphered. The first translations show that the text is dedicated to Ashurbanipal's construction projects in Nineveh and other parts of the empire. The Sun Gate, where the stele was found, was one of the main entrances in the powerful defensive walls of the ancient city. And interestingly, they are still used by cars today in modern Mosul. It hasn't been decided yet where the monument will be kept permanently, but the researcher hopes that further deciphering of the inscriptions will help us understand better. The last decades of the existence of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which is more than 2,500 years old, are still bringing us new discoveries. It's just that they have to be literally dug out from under the rubble of modern war. The Tomb of the Giants. In Sardinia, not far from the city of Macomer, at an altitude of 740 meters, they found the so-called Tomb of the Giants, which is 3,800 years old. The two-level structure is made of trachyte blocks, and for many years was completely hidden by thickets, and it's simply impossible to notice it from the trail. Inside, the burial chamber and a monumental semicircular extedra in front of the entrance have been preserved. It's something like a platform for ceremonies. The unique feature of this particular tomb is that the space at the entrance is divided into two levels. Such a structure is found extremely rarely, and it may change our understanding of the construction technologies of the Nuragic civilization, which existed in Sardinia before the arrival of the Romans. The giants' tombs themselves appeared around 1800 BC as a development of ancient dolmens, and they served as a place for collective burials. That is, not just one person was buried here, but many at once. The semicircular platform in front of the entrance was used for ceremonies in honor of the ancestors. Scientists found pottery that confirms people lived in this area from the earliest periods. And around the tomb, there are traces of human presence from prehistoric times to the Roman era. But along with this, specialists also recorded something unpleasant: clear traces of illegal excavations. That is, someone reached the tomb before the archaeologist and possibly took something from there already. And the very name Tomb of the Giants is not an archaeological term, but a local legend. The Nuragic people who built such structures, according to legend, were people of great height. It's impossible to verify this because their remains simply haven't survived. And once again, we're rewriting history. The next discovery isn't an object, but literally an imprint of a moment. It lasted only a few days, but has been preserved for millions of years. In northern Kenya, along the shores of Lake Turkana, an international team of researchers led by Kevin Hatala described in detail a fossilized trail. It is 1.4 million years old. It captures a group of 8 individuals of the species Paranthropus boisei, extinct relatives of humans, who were leisurely walking along the muddy shore past hippos and antelopes. The story of this discovery began almost half a century ago. Back in 1978, geologist Kay Berensmeyer from the Smithsonian Institution noticed a strange round depression in the rock. When her colleagues cleared away the layer of rock, they found a pair of footprints there, imprinted in ancient mud next to a hippopotamus track. The site was temporarily covered with sand for preservation. Full-scale excavations resumed only in 2016 and 2023, and they found a real archive: 21 hominin footprints, plus tracks of crocodiles, elephants, and other animals from that era. Volcanic ash helped to accurately determine the age of the footprints, about 1,430,000 years. At that time, 2 different species of bipeds lived by the lake: the stocky Paranthropus boisei with powerful teeth, and Homo erectus, a likely direct ancestor of modern humans. And here's the most interesting part. Analysis of the footprints showed that Paranthropus were up to 1.8 meters tall and weighed about 75 kilograms. That means they were not smaller or weaker than members of the Homo genus, as was long believed. Both species, apparently, had similar sizes and lived side by side in the same environment. Today, we live alongside people of different nationalities and skin colors. And in the past, humanoid creatures could live next to each other, and they could even interbreed. There's a second surprise as well. All 8 individuals who left the trail of footprints were mostly adult males, without females or children. One of the researchers, Neil Roach from Harvard, believes this points to a complex social structure. It's possible that males lived in large groups, competing for mates. But for safety, they would gather by the water in a kind of patrol squad. 8 Paranthropus once walked across the wet mud, hurrying somewhere on their own business. And they had no idea that their path would be preserved for 1,400,000 years. And it would force us to rewrite the schoolbook idea of who was bigger, them or our direct ancestors.
A child discovered a gruesome burial.
The next discovery started in the most ordinary way, with a child who was just playing in the yard. In one of the Austrian cities, a girl found a bone on the lawn, and her mother reported it to the police. The initial examinations quickly confirmed that the bone was human. The Federal Monuments Authority of Austria got involved in the case, and full-scale excavations began. At first, archaeologists discovered 6 mass graves, then another 9. In total, the remains belong to at least 120 people. They are scattered without any order over an area of about 150 square meters. Apparently, the bodies were thrown into the pits hastily, without any burial rituals. Anthropologists determined that the remains mostly belonged to young men, from 15 to 20 years old. The cause of death is still unclear. No traces of gunshot wounds were found, although in one case it was discovered that shortly before death, one person had their lower leg amputated. This may indicate that this was a burial at a military hospital. The location of the graves and the initial anthropological analysis suggest that these people died during the Napoleonic Wars, which took place from 1792 to 1815. That is, possibly, these were patients of a field hospital or camp who were buried together. Further research, DNA analysis, and isotope analysis should clarify the origin of these people, their diet, and the circumstances of their death. Experts are already calling this find one of the most important archaeological discoveries of recent decades, precisely because of its scale. 120 people in one place. This is rare even for the sites of major historical battles. Global logistics in the 16th century. The ship Batavia belongs to the Dutch East India Company. It crashed off the coast of Western Australia in 1629. By the way, this shipwreck went down in history not only because of its cargo. After the disaster, a mutiny broke out among the survivors, which ended in mass killings. But this time, the scientists were not interested in the mutiny, but in the building stone on board. It was previously believed that all this stone was quarried from a single site, but new research has shown that the materials came from several European quarries at once. The problem is that almost 4 centuries underwater have changed the appearance of the cargo, and many of the blocks, at first glance, look absolutely identical. Historical records have also not been fully preserved, so the scientists decided to look inside the stone, literally at the level of microscopic grains of the mineral zircon. Its chemical composition directly depends on where exactly the rock was formed, which means zircon can be used to determine the origin of the stone with high accuracy. For this, uranium-lead dating was used. It's a method that allows you to distinguish materials that are indistinguishable to the naked eye. It turned out that blocks that look identical on the outside were actually brought from at least 2 different regions in what is now Germany. It turns out the stones were quarried in different places, then brought together in one batch and sent to the other side of the world. Apparently, these blocks were intended for the construction of a fortified headquarters in Jakarta. So more than 400 years ago, there was already such a well-established supply system that materials for a single construction project could easily be assembled from several countries at once. The wreckage of the Batavia was found back in 1960, and since then, it has been one of the main sites of marine archaeology in Australia. But as you can see, even more than 60 years after its discovery, the ship continues to tell us something new. Only now, instead of a diver, you need a mass spectrometer for that. A discovery that's 90 million years old. Next, the find is so small that you could hold it between 2 fingers, and it's so rare that there's only one like it in the whole country. Scientists from the Geological University of Moscow State University, together with colleagues from the Geological Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences, have described a fossil pearl from the Cretaceous period in the Voronezh region, about 90 million years old. This is the first reliably described fossil pearl of a bivalve mollusk found in Russia. It was formed by large marine mollusks called inoceramids, which were widespread in the seas of the Cretaceous period and had massive shells with a thick calcite layer. Apparently, this is what helped the pearls survive to the present day. After all, regular pearls contain a lot of organic material and almost always decompose in the ground long before a paleontologist can find them. To study the find without destroying it, microcomputed tomography was used. It's the same principle as a hospital CT scan, but for stone. It turned out that at first, the pearl grew freely inside the mollusk, and then attached itself to the inner surface of the shell. Inside, They also found a tiny core, probably a grain of sand or a fragment of the shell, around which everything began. In the same way as pearls form in oysters today. The researchers gathered all the known Cretaceous pearl finds in the world. There are only 24 of them, and most are also associated with inoceramids. The oldest amber. Paleontologists discovered amber that is 385 million years old at the Huzhe Kutserzati geological formation in China. This is the middle of the Devonian period. Previously, the oldest amber was considered to be 320 million years old. It came from Carboniferous period deposits in the USA. So the new discovery immediately pushes the history of amber back by 65 million years. The fragments themselves are tiny, from 1/10 to 5/10 of a millimeter. The largest are no more than 1.5 millimeters, and no fossilized insects were found in them. But what's really strange is something else. Chemical analysis showed that the composition of the resin is similar to the resin of modern conifers, pine and Araucaria. The problem is that in the Middle Devonian, there were no modern plants, including conifers, yet. They appeared only at the end of the Devonian period. So, resin similar in composition to pine resin was produced by plants that were not related to pines at all. Researchers suggest that these could have been some early non-seed vascular plants or ancient tree-like club mosses, ancestors much more primitive than anything that produces resin today. It turns out that the ability to produce protective resin appeared during evolution more than once, independently in completely different, even unrelated groups of plants. Apparently, this was to heal damage after fires and to protect against fungi. Scientists believe that in the Middle Devonian period, arthropods did not yet cause serious damage to plants. So, at that time, resin was used not so much against insects, but rather as a first aid kit for the plant itself. Mini duck. Another small find today, literally the size of a finger, but with a story that stretches across half of Europe. Not far from the Czech town of Tuchin, museum employee Miroslav Kamenek noticed a miniature bronze figurine of a waterfowl bird over 2,000 years old on the surface of a field during fieldwork. Only 23 millimeters long and less than 10 grams in weight, and its condition is almost perfect. And what is especially nice for an archaeologist, this time they didn't even need a metal detector. The figurine was just lying on the ground. Upon closer inspection, it turned out that the ancient craftsman had even worked out the small anatomical details. Bulging, rounded eyes, an elongated beak, and on the back part of the body there are transverse notches, imitating the texture of a duck's plumage. The exact name of the figurine is unknown. Maybe it was a children's toy, or a piece for a board game. Maybe it's an object with ritual significance. After all, waterfowl often had such meaning in Iron Age cultures. But the main working theory is that the duck was a decorative fitting that was attached to something larger, a wooden box, a piece of horse harness, or a ceremonial vessel. The find is also interesting because of where exactly it was made. Tuchin is located at the Moravian Gate, a natural passage between the Carpathians and the Sudetes. The northern section of the famous Amber Road passed through here. Amber from the shores of the Baltic moved south toward the Danube and the Adriatic, and in the opposite direction went salt, metals, and finished goods. According to archaeologists, similar bronze animal figurines, boars and waterfowl, are regularly found along this entire route, from Poland through Moravia to Austria. So the Tuchin duck is part of a great artistic tradition, not a coincidence. The creature poops gold. The next find is a bit smaller in scale, literally. We're going to talk about a microorganism, but people have tried for centuries to artificially achieve the results of its work. Medieval alchemists spent their whole lives trying to turn lead into gold, and they didn't succeed. But the bacterium Cupria vitis metallodurans manages to do it without any magic. It lives in soils oversaturated with heavy metals, in places where almost all living things die instantly. For most living beings, both copper and gold in large quantities are real poisons. But this bacterium has learned to use copper to its advantage. It needs it for its metabolism. The problem starts when there is too much copper. Then the bacterium activates something like a pump that pushes the excess copper out. But this pump makes a mistake. Along with the copper, it also pulls dissolved gold from the soil into the cell. And now there are two poisons inside the cell at once, which together can kill it. To survive, the bacterium activates a special enzyme called COPA. It works like a double filter. It deals with copper easily. It turns copper into a form that the cell can easily push out. But with gold, it does something interesting. It neutralizes its toxicity and transforms the dissolved gold into tiny solid metal particles, just a few nanometers in size. That's thousands of times thinner than a human hair. Then the bacterium simply pushes these gold particles onto its outer shell, as if spitting them out. In nature, such bacteria live in colonies on the surface of minerals. When billions of microbes cleanse themselves of toxins for centuries, the discarded gold nanoparticles layer themselves on top of each other. Scientists believe that it is these bacteria that are partly responsible for the formation of real gold nuggets in nature. So, the shiny piece of gold that someone finds in a stream could very well be the result of the work of trillions of invisible creatures. Now researchers are trying to harness this mechanism to extract gold from low-grade ore and recycle old electronics. Without mercury and cyanides, which are usually used in industry. Who built them? The next discovery is from the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, in the middle of rice fields and tall grass. There are stone figures with rounded faces, huge eyes, and barely defined features. They are almost twins of the famous moai from Easter Island. But while scientists know at least something about the creators of the moai, science has been silent for more than 100 years about the megaliths of the Bata Valley. In total, more than 400 carved stones have been found in the valleys of Bata, Besoa, and Napu, but only about 30 have human features. The tallest is a 4-meter giant named Polindo, which roughly translates as the Joker. The local residents have their own legend for each figure, from a court jester to a village guard who was turned to stone for stealing rice. The megaliths were discovered back in 1908, and since then their age has been estimated very roughly somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000 years. And here's what's truly strange. There are absolutely no traces of settlements in this area, no tools or other artifacts that could tell us anything about the people who created all of this. Besides the human figures, there are also kalambas in the valley, huge stone cylinders that look like barrels or mortars. The local residents called them baths for kings. But excavations revealed something else. These are collective burial urns for the nobility. Inside one of them, archaeologists found the remains of at least 10 people, with signs of cremation and ritual dental mutilation. Today, the megaliths are located within the Lore Lindu National Park, which has been on the UNESCO list of biosphere reserves since 1977. In 2025, the provincial authorities submitted documents to have the complex included on the UNESCO World Heritage List. The fish that does not age. On this channel, I always talk about something ancient, but now I want to tell you about a living creature that officially holds the title of the longest-lived vertebrate. I'm talking about the Greenland shark. Radiocarbon analysis of the eye lens of these sharks has shown that their age can exceed 500 years. For comparison, that's several times longer than giant tortoises live for, bowhead whales, and of course humans. The oldest specimens of these sharks were born way back in the Middle Ages. At that time, constant wars were raging across Europe, and there were still several hundred years to go before the Industrial Revolution. For a long time, it was believed that such a long lifespan was simply a side effect of living in the deep northern waters, where resources are catastrophically scarce. But the more scientists study these sharks, the more interesting their biology becomes. In the vast majority of animals on the planet, metabolism gradually slows down with age. It's different for Greenland sharks. The metabolism of a newborn and an old individual is almost the same. This is partly explained by the fact that Greenland shark pups grow phenomenally slowly, only 1 to 2 centimeters per year, slower than trees. And they spend between 8 and 18 years in their mother's womb. But these sharks also have something else: unique mechanisms for genome repair and cell regeneration. The eyes of almost all adult Greenland sharks are infected with glowing parasitic copepods, which literally hook themselves into the cornea. In humans, such contact would definitely lead to rapid vision loss. This winter, an international team of scientists studied sharks infected with these parasites. They were between 130 and 150 years old, and they found out that their eyesight is just as sharp as that of young individuals. And let me remind you, the oldest ones are over 500 years old. No one has gone in there for 5,000 years. 2 tombs from the early dynastic period were found at the Jabbar al-Tayr site in Minya province. They were sealed about 5,000 years ago, and until now, they have never been opened. The place itself was used as a cemetery for several thousand years. There were burials there from the pre-dynastic period all the way to the late royal era. The earliest Egyptian tombs appeared around 3100 BC. They were simple pits, lined with bricks and covered with plaster. Over time, they became more complex. Underground burial chambers and mastabas appeared, above-ground structures for burial goods that indicated the status of the deceased. Both of the new tombs belong to this transitional stage, and they are remarkably similar to the tomb of King Cordina in Abydos, the largest burial of the First Dynasty. It has a ritual chamber, 2 storerooms, and 133 chambers surrounding the main burial. But the most interesting thing is the construction of the walls themselves. Scientists notice that the walls of one of the tombs are thicker at the base and gradually become thinner toward the top. This means that even then, the builders understood how to evenly distribute the weight of the structure. In other words, the foundation of engineering solutions that would later be used to build the pyramids was laid right here, centuries before Giza. Wooden supports were also built into the walls. In some places, they reinforced specific sections, while in others, the supports ran along the entire wall. Nearby, they also found pre-dynastic burials. The skeletal remains were in a bent position, wrapped in plant mats with ceramic vessels placed nearby. The decoration on the ceramics made it possible to date these burials to the Naqada II and Naqada III periods. In other words, to a time before the very first dynasty appeared. How many bodies does one saint have? Back in the 19th century, the French historian Ludovic Lalande, while studying church archives, compiled statistics on duplicate relics throughout Europe. About 30 whole bodies of St. George the Victorious were venerated at the same time in different churches. The same number for St. Gregory and St. Pancras. In different parts of Europe, 7 bodies of John the Baptist were displayed at the same time, along with 8 heads and 11 index fingers. One French abbot, while venerating yet another head of the Baptist in the Amiens Cathedral, couldn't help but write, "Thank God, this is the 5th or 6th head of John the Baptist that I have touched in my life. How did one person end up with so many bodies?" Historians name several reasons, and some of them are quite legitimate. The Catholic and Orthodox traditions allow relics to be divided into parts, a hand in one church, a part in another, the head in a third. But there is also a less pleasant reason. This is ordinary substitution. In 1671, the abbot of the Makariyev monastery passed off the bones of an ordinary monk as the relics of Makary Zheltovadsky. And for 4 years, believers worshipped a fake until the deception was uncovered. The most striking exposures happened in Soviet Russia in 1919-1922, when the authorities opened relic shrines on a massive scale. In the reliquary of Tikhon Zadonsky, instead of incorrupt remains, they found rags, cotton, and women's stockings. And in the Alexander Seversky monastery, instead of relics, there was an ordinary wax doll. And this isn't just a thing of the past. In 2025, journalists discovered an entire market for relics on online auctions. A reliquary with the relics of Saint Euphrosyne of Polotsk was being sold for $1,600, and a bandage supposedly used on Padre Pio's wound for almost $4,000. An investigation that same year uncovered an international network of fake relic dealers who were linked to an Italian citizen. Almost every other online ad for relics led to him or his intermediaries. But experts believe that there is no real relic market. What is being sold is 99.9% fake. Have you ever wondered why, out of millions of ancient artifacts throughout history, only these have survived to this day? It turns out that what reaches us is not the most important, but what has survived purely by chance. Which discovery surprised you the most today? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because a new video is coming soon.